In the dying weeks of World War II, scattered groups of German female support staff radio helpers, nurses, clerks found themselves briefly held as prisoners by advancing U.S. forces. These women had grown up hearing only the voice of the regime, a voice that filled their childhoods with fear, especially about black Allied soldiers. They believed those stories. Everyone did. But when the moment finally came to face black American troops for the very first time, what they saw didn't match anything they had been taught, and that single encounter would shake their beliefs to the core. Spring 1945. Germany was collapsing in real time. American units poured across the Rhine, taking over towns, hospitals, communication hubs, everything the retreating German army left behind in the chaos. Mixed into this human tide were a handful of women, telephone operators, who had abandoned switchboards, Red Cross nurses pulled from field stations, anti-aircraft helpers who had never fired a shot, and medical clerks who barely understood what was happening around them. These weren't frontline soldiers, just ordinary women swept away by a war that was ending faster than anyone expected. Most of them had never laid eyes on an American before, and absolutely none had ever seen a black American for years. Nazi broadcasts had fed them grotesque myths, twisted stories, warnings, and racist fantasies so relentless that many never questioned them. Those lies had shaped their entire understanding of the outside world. But now, with their capture, all those stories were about to be tested outside a newly occupied German village. Nearly 24 female detainees sat clustered together, some on crates, some on thin blankets, all of them exhausted, starving, and terrified of what came next. A few white American guards stood nearby, watching them without much interest. No one told the women what would happen to them. Then a whisper moved through the group like a chill. "Transport trucks are coming." From a supply unit, another voice followed, even quieter. "They say some of the soldiers are black." The reaction was immediate. Spines stiffened, hands trembled, eyes widened in dread. A young woman no older than 20 leaned close to her friend and breathed. They told us those men would hurt us." Her friend shook her head, not in certainty, but in confusion. "How can we know? They never let us hear the truth." Every woman there had lived inside one controlled bubble for years, and now the real world was approaching in the form of rumbling engines on a nearby road. The growl of motors echoed between the village walls. 2 American trucks appeared around the corner, each one coated in dust, each crewed by black soldiers from a segregated quartermaster company. The German women froze. The trucks braked. A cloud of dust drifted forward. The soldiers jumped down from the tailgates, stretching stiff backs, rubbing sore shoulders, cracking jokes about bad rations and long drives. They had no idea they were stepping into a storm of fear and indoctrination. The women expected monsters. What they saw were just men, young, tired, irritated with their sergeant, laughing at each other's worn-out boots. Human, completely, unmistakably human. Everything they'd been told suddenly felt wrong. One of the soldiers, a black sergeant with calm eyes, walked toward the frightened group. He took in their exhausted faces, their trembling hands, the layers of fear clinging to them. In steady English he said, "Ladies, the trucks are ready. You're safe. We'll get you something to eat when we reach camp." The interpreter repeated his words. Silence. Absolute silence. Food, safety, politeness. Nothing matched the horrors they had been taught. An older auxiliary whispered, barely audible, "Why? Why is he speaking kindly?" Another murmured, "This goes against everything we learned." But the real shock was still ahead, as the soldiers prepared to load the women onto the trucks. One detainee struggled with a heavy canvas bag, her only possession left from home. She pulled, dragged, nearly stumbled under the weight. A black American private stepped forward and gently said, "Please, ma'am, let me handle that." She recoiled instantly, fear taking over. Propaganda told her she should run. Reality showed a man simply offering help. Without hesitation, he lifted the bag, set it carefully onto the truck bed, not thrown, not dropped, but gently placed. And that small act was enough to crack open everything she believed. Then he offered his hand to help her climb aboard. She froze, her mind screaming with every warning she had ever been given, every story drilled into her by years of propaganda. Slowly, cautiously, she lifted her trembling hand and placed it in his. The touch was ordinary, human, and yet it broke something inside her. Not fear, not panic, but a lifetime of lies. For the first time, she realized how deeply she had been deceived, how carefully the world outside Germany had been hidden from her, and how utterly wrong she had been to expect cruelty. That single act of kindness shattered the world she had known. As the truck rumbled forward toward the processing camp, the atmosphere inside was quiet but electric. The black American soldiers spoke among themselves about home, about the unbearable heat, about baseball games they missed, about meals that weren't quite like their mothers made. Their voices were light, human, ordinary. They made no threats, uttered no harsh words, and never once displayed anything but respect. The German women, huddled together on crates and blankets, exchanged glances that shifted from fear to curiosity, from curiosity to a hesitant acknowledgement that they were witnessing something entirely new. One whispered to another, "They are treating us better than we ever expected." Her companion nodded slowly, almost ashamed. "This is not what we were told." The ride continued in reflective silence, each woman lost in her own thoughts, replaying memories of indoctrination and propaganda, realizing that every story, every warning, every caricature she had been fed was a lie. The soldiers' ordinary gestures of decency, the way they lifted bags, handed out food, offered a hand, spoke more loudly than any lecture could have. They were human, approachable, and entirely unlike the terrifying monsters she had imagined. Each mile the truck traveled was a mile away from the fear and hatred that had been instilled in her, a slow journey toward understanding and humility. When they reached the temporary holding camp, the women were given blankets and water, and for many, their first real meal in days. The soldiers moved efficiently, tired but kind, unloading supplies and returning to their duties without fanfare. No cruelty, no humiliation, no demeaning words. Just basic human decency. The German women watched quietly, some with disbelief, some with tears, some with a rising shame they could hardly process. One nurse, years later, would recall in an interview, "They treated us with more dignity than we could have expected from anyone." That kindness did more to dismantle the lies we had been taught than any speech, pamphlet, or broadcast could ever do. For these women, that moment became a turning point. They realized that the world outside Germany was not the monstrous caricature painted by propaganda. The very people they had been taught to fear, black American soldiers, serving a segregated army, enduring discrimination, themselves extended humanity and dignity to them. That simple, ordinary kindness rewrote their understanding, proving that one small gesture can sometimes undo years of lies. One touch, one smile, one act of help changed everything. History rarely gives such quiet but powerful reminders of human decency. If this story moved you, share your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe for more true stories from World War II that reveal the human heart behind the history.